So continuing, we looked at service reception in another way also. We were able to measure how often our players were getting aced or committing reception errors. Obviously something we wanted to avoid. And what we found, first of all, is because when we started this, we really didn't have any idea what that number should be. As coaches, we want it to be, 0%, but obviously as players, we understand that the number is never going to be that way because the other team plays volleyball well too, and the other team serves tough. And so it's not possible to develop players who never get aced. And what we found, again, at our level was that players were getting aced roughly between a low of about 8% and a high of about 13%. So that at least gave us some context for evaluating the statistic. And our goal then, or our standard then, we just set the goal to be, let's make sure that we're getting aced less than 8% of the time. Or in other words, we have less than 8% of all attempts end in reception errors. So two ways to say that. So that was just another way that we evaluated the strength of our serve receive passing. Again, because what we found is that skill heavily influenced our ability to get first ball kills, and first ball kills heavily influenced the result of the match for us. So moving on from then we looked at our transition game, and that was how often are we getting kills or scoring in transition. So after we get a dig, and that could be a dig by our defender, or it could be a dig by our blocker if she decided not to block and pulled. So it's in either one of those situations. We developed a performance standard of 38%. So we expected that we would turn a little bit more than 1/3 of our.
Picking up again where we left off, we're overcoming adversity today, folks, which is the transition part of the game. And so I think we had said that we're looking to score about 38% of the time in transition overall. And again, we measured players' performance proficiency based on their ability to hit that number or not. The next thing that we measured was essentially our errors. So how often were we committing errors? And we just called that IPE, or in-play efficiency. So IPE, in-play efficiency. And we started out with a goal of 90% there, meaning that out of every 10 attempts at attacking, we wanted 9 of them to be at least be in the court. So 1 error out of every 10 is what we were shooting for there. And following traditional statistics, a stuff block was considered to be a hitting error. What we found over years of performance was that our best players were hitting about 90%, but were never substantially more than that. And the range of performance was about 79 to about 90%. So committing on the low end of performance about 3 errors out of every attempt, or 2 errors out of every attempt, up to about 1 error out of every attempt. So those were the performance metrics for that. But we had different standards for, again, whether we were in system or out of system. So if you imagine volleyball being played where the play is in system, we expect it to be less errors in that situation. So we expected to be about 92% of the time in the court, or only about 8% error if we were in the system. If we were out of system, we expected, while we didn't want errors, we expected that number to be less than that. We expected it to be about 87 to 88% in play, or roughly 12% error, understanding that the out of system game required us probably to take some more chances or put us in a suboptimal attack position. So, and then in the transition phase, we were about 88% too. So after we dug a ball, we still expected to be in the court about 88% of the time, and allowed for about 12% error, including stuff blocks in our attack. So again, those were the numbers that we found were relevant for us. Moving on to serving efficiency. We didn't spend a whole lot of time on this particular statistic. For us, it wasn't terribly meaningful, but it may be really meaningful if you're coaching younger players. And that was, we expected 9 out of every 10 serves to be in the court, 1 error out of every 10. There was some movement on those numbers depending on the type of serve. If a particular player was very aggressively jump spin serving for power, we allowed for a little bit more error in that situation, because there's more risk built into the play. If it was a standing float serve, where it was a less risk being taken. We expected that to be 90, maybe 91% at the best. An interesting anecdote, what we found with those numbers is as we shared them with players, we were careful to explain to players that more than 90% wasn't necessarily a great thing. I remember we had a player who was an exceptional volleyball player, and she took a lot of pride in seeing that she was serving 90% of the time in the court, 4% error. And from a coaching standpoint, we thought that that was an indicator that she wasn't serving tough enough. If she was missing so few serves, 96 out of 100 in, we thought there was an indication she wasn't either serving the ball to the perimeter or to the court or moving passers enough or serving with enough speed. And so we saw very high rates of in play generally for us meant low risk and unaggressive serve. So that was a problem that we wanted to address with the player and suggest to her that the other team, we know about ourselves that if we side out, we win. Well, that's also true for the opponent. And we need to serve at least well enough to lower their side out percentage. And so that's how we looked at serving. We measured in the serving game. We also measured how many times should we be getting aces. Now, it wasn't a goal. It was never our goal on the service line to get an ace. But we just wanted to learn about volleyball and learn about, for an average Division I women's college beach volleyball in the United States player, how often were players getting aces? And we found a range over, again, about 6 or 7 years, we found a range of about 8% to a high of about 12%. So again, if those were our standards and somebody was serving and getting aces 2% of the time, we didn't generally find that they were just always for their entire career playing against the best passers. We generally found that they probably was something about the serve that it wasn't being aggressive enough. Perhaps there wasn't enough speed on it, or perhaps it wasn't moving the passer sufficiently enough. So again, we just used that 8 to 12% ace ratio as just the guideline to keep in the back of our minds. And then a final statistic that we found very valuable, which and I developed with Shane Spellman, a very good friend of mine and great coach here in the United States, was we created a ratio statistic, which was, we just made this up, which was aces to reception errors. And so for any individual player, we looked at the number of aces they were able to get while serving. And again, I can't stress enough that we didn't ask players to try to get aces, but we nonetheless knew that they happened if a player was following good principles of serving, which was to try to get the other team out of system of the serve. So we would look at the number of aces she achieved as a server and express it as a ratio by looking at it in the context of the number of aces she gave up as a passer, or the number of reception errors she gave up. And what we wanted to know there was, if someone looks to us like a great server and gets a high 15% aces, say, we also want to know if she's a poor passer and is getting ace 15% of the time, then her serve and pass game was essentially netting out at 0. And what we wanted our players to be is at least on the plus side. We wanted them to be on the plus side, generally scoring more aces than as a server than giving up as a passer. So again, that was just a statistic that we made up, but it allowed us to kind of look at the quality of our players' performance on the first contact of a rally, both as a serving player and as a passing player.
Our digs into points. But again, the coach has at least